watching Reason and Theology Live. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Lofton.
Welcome back to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael. I wanted to sneak in a video on Haec Sancta and the question of whether or not a council is over a pope. This is something that comes up often, especially question about Haec Sancta and how is it compatible with the papacy. In fact, I just had somebody ask me about it. I think it was two days ago. But I've had people ask about it many times. And so I have spoken about it before on the show. But what I wanted to do in this video is not only just cover my opinion on Haec Sancta, but more importantly, the perspective of a scholar on the magisterium, Father Francis Sullivan, who is, of course, probably the greatest theologian on magisterial studies in the 20th century. I mean, his credentials are incredible, and he's pretty much recognized to be the greatest authority on the magisterium in the last century. Passed away in 2018. Unfortunately, I wish I would have been able to interview him. But yeah, we do at least have his writings. Now, I want to go over this book, Creative Fidelity, Weighing and Interpreting Documents of the Magisterium, again by Francis Sullivan. And he goes over Haec Sancta around page 72. Now, again, for those who may not be familiar with Haec Sancta, this is it's part of the session of the Ecumenical Council of Constance in the 1400s. One of its sessions dealt with a question. It actually dealt with multiple questions, but one of them was the Pope and this particular council's relationship to the Pope, because at the time, there were quite a few people that were confused because there were multiple people who claimed to be the Pope. So when you have a case where multiple people are claiming to be the Pope and it's unclear who should we follow, the council intervenes, steps in, and is able to resolve the matter and get us out of what's called the Western Schism, where you have, again, multiple people claiming to be the Pope, and there's chaos going on in Christendom. You can't simply appeal to the Pope because that's the very thing in question, is who is the Pope. So in this case, an ecumenical council is called, and it resolves the matter. Now, it has something in here that sounds like the heresy of conciliarism to some. And the heresy of conciliarism, of course, is condemned at the First Vatican Council. And this is the idea, or it's the heresy, that an ecumenical council is above the Pope in authority. That is clearly condemned by the First Vatican Council. But there is something in Constance that somewhat sounds like conciliarism. So then the question is, well, did an ecumenical council teach heresy? That's odd. Well, no, I don't believe that the ecumenical council taught the heresy of conciliarism. But it's more important to hear the opinion of more credible individuals than myself, namely Father Francis Sullivan and his opinion on the matter. So we're going to go over his perspective briefly on it. But let me read the relevant portion from the Council of Constance just for reference point. I'm going to skip, the majority of the document and just go right to the paragraph in question. It says in Haec Sancta, first, it declares that legitimately assembled in the Holy Spirit, constituting a general council and representing the Catholic Church militant. It has power immediately from Christ, and that everyone of whatever state or dignity, even papal, is bound to obey it in those matters which pertain to the faith, the eradication of the sad schism, notice that there, and the general reform of the said Church of God in the head and members. Notice especially here that they're intending to eradicate the sad schism. But there's this reference that the Pope, even the Pope, is bound to obey them, and that it has its authority immediately from Christ. So then the question is, okay, well, isn't that the heresy of conciliarism condemned at the First Vatican Council? No, it actually isn't. But it's completely understandable that somebody would think that, hey, wait, this sounds like conciliarism. This sounds like what's condemned later on at the First Vatican Council. Here's what Sullivan has to say. This decree raises a great many questions, to practically all of which conflicting answers have been given. And that's true. There are many different answers to this situation. To discuss all of these questions would require a long book, and long books have been written on the subject. Here we shall ask only one question. What doctrinal weight does this decree have? I like Sullivan. He asks the questions that I like. What kind of doctrinal weight does this thing have? Joseph Gill judges this decree to be simply invalid on the grounds that at the time it was enacted, Constance was not yet an ecumenical council, since it had not been summoned by a legitimate pope, and the subsequently elected Pope Martin V never gave the needed papal confirmation to Haec Sancta. That is in dispute. Some would argue that Martin V did give papal approbation to Haec Sancta. Some would say he didn't. Some would say that he gave it to only certain aspects to Haec Sancta. That part is debatable. But Gill, an incredible scholar himself, takes the position that Martin V did not actually confirm Haec Sancta. So he wants to say, well, look, at the time, this session wasn't even ecumenical because it wasn't convoked by a pope, and at that time, general councils were convoked by popes, and it wasn't ratified by a pope, which is a necessary condition in the Catholic Church, papal ratification. However, others argue that given the actual circumstances, a general council could act without the approval of a pope, and that's known as the concept of an imperfect ecumenical council. It's an ecumenical council, but it's imperfect because a pope hasn't ratified it. A general council could act without the approval of a pope, since this was the only way the schism could be brought to an end. The principle here was the sound one, that if the actions of a pope tended to tear down the church rather than build it up, the church could not lack an adequate remedy, which a general council would have authority to apply. So basically, there has to be some kind of remedy. If you have some pope out there causing all kinds of confusion, there has to be some kind of remedy that the church has. Maybe it's not conciliarism, but there has to be some kind of recourse. Obviously, in such a case, the council's authority could not depend on papal convocation or approval, but would have to come, as Haec Sancta says, immediately from Christ. I believe that given the actual situation, Constance was correct in describing itself as a general council, with authority from Christ to do what had to be done to resolve the schism. So in a case where you have confusion and you have an emergency situation, he wants to say you could have authority immediately given to these bishops. Now, he's not saying that, all councils always have this. This is obviously in extraordinary circumstances. But in the case of an emergency situation where the question of who is the Pope is in question, he wants to say that, yes, in this case, an imperfect ecumenical council could have its authority immediately from Christ. And that's compatible with Vatican I. That's not condemned by Vatican I. Vatican I is in reference to the Pope, number one, in a situation where it's clear who the Pope is, and also that the Pope doesn't can't be judged by the council in the sense that the council has authority over him as a superior. Constance actually isn't claiming that it is superior to the Pope, but it is saying that the Pope has to listen to him in this case because it's unclear who the Pope is. If it were clear who the Pope was, well, obviously they wouldn't have to listen to the council. But in the case where it's unclear, people who are claiming to be the Pope need to listen to them. That's kind of the idea. So it's not what Vatican I condemns as conciliarism. For this purpose, it had to first declare its own competence. to act as it intended to do, that necessarily involved declaring that everyone, even of papal dignity, was bound to obey it in matters that pertain to the faith and the eradication of the said schism. It is another question whether the decree went too far in including matters which pertain to the reform of the church, and in extending this also to any other legitimately assembled general council. And of course, we could say that, yeah, some pushback could be offered to the council and what it says there. Not everything that the council necessarily says has to be definitive. And that's, in fact, what he's going to address next. We shall focus our question on the dogmatic weight of Haec Sancta. Did the council define its authority over everyone, even of papal dignity, as a dogma of faith? So was it actually proposing this dogmatically? Was it really putting this forward as something that it's teaching, or is it putting this idea forward as a disciplinary measure in a time of confusion where it's unclear who the Pope is? Those are two different things. On this question, I agree with several noted scholars, including such experts on medieval and conciliar history as Humbert Jedin and Brian Tierney, who agree that Constance did not intend to issue this decree as a dogma of faith. It's actually, we could even go a step further. Not only did it not intend to decree this as a dogma of faith, did it even intend to teach this as a doctrine? No, I would argue no. I would say that this is disciplinary on its part. It's not even intended as a doctrine. It's intended as a discipline in the case where it's unclear who the Pope is. Those who are claiming to be the Pope need to listen to what they're saying. Tierney puts it this way. Haec Sancta is not cast in the form of a solemn dogmatic definition. It does not demand belief like a dogmatic definition. It exacts obedience, which means it's disciplinary, like a decree of positive law. In its preamble, Haec Sancta does not purport to define an article of faith. It does not appeal to scripture or tradition. It does not pronounce anathemas against unbelievers. Very important. We cannot be sure that it was intended as an immutable dogmatic decree, and in such cases, it would surely be wise to adopt a variation of Occam's razor and abide by the principle that infallibles are not to be multiplied without necessity. Yeah, that's reasonable. Jedin agrees with this view and notes also that when the Schismatic Council of Basel attempted to define conciliar supremacy over legitimate popes as an article of faith, listen, it was not raising a new issue that had not been raised at Constance. I'm sorry, it was raising a new issue that had not been raised at Constance. So let me read that again. When the Schismatic Council of Basel attempted to define conciliar supremacy over legitimate popes as an article of faith, it was raising a new issue that had not been raised at Constance. In other words, this, when you have the Schismatic Council of Basel claiming conciliarism, actually teaching the heresy of conciliarism, it raises it as a new issue that had not been addressed at Constance previously. That's odd if Constance had taught the heresy of conciliarism. Well, of course it did not. It was a disciplinary decree. It wasn't anything that was actually as far as teaching. And again, what it's saying anyway would be distinguished from conciliarism, as I've noted. Tierney and Jedin, along with other scholars, agree in seeing Haec Sancta not as a dogmatic definition, but as a legislative decree, applying a generally accepted principle of medieval canon law to the actual situation in which the church found itself, and extending this principle to similar situations if they should occur in the future. There's a good deal of ambiguity in the way Constance expressed this decree, and scholars will no doubt continue to differ in their interpretation of it. But there is good authority for holding that while it is a valid decree, it is not a dogmatic definition. So one could maintain that it's a valid decree, but not dogmatic and not even doctrinal. It's just merely a disciplinary decree that's actually not even at odds with conciliarism. With Vatican I's condemnation of conciliarism. One could also raise the question whether at the time it was enacted, as far as the decree, Constance possessed the authority to define a dogma of faith anyway. It certainly had the authority to do what had to be done to resolve the schism. But for that, it was not necessary to settle a dogmatic issue. He says, in my opinion, Constance did not have the authority to define a dogma until later on, when its judgments could be confirmed by a certainly legitimate pope. Fair enough. Prior to electing such a legitimate pope, the council had issued 2 doctrinal decrees condemning a number of propositions of Wycliffe and Huss. Martin V, the pope elected by the council, subsequently issued a bull which contained all those propositions and called upon persons suspected of favoring the opinions of Wycliffe and or Huss to declare that they rejected them. The papal bull confirmed the conciliar judgments concerning the opinions of Wycliffe and Huss, that some of them are notoriously heretical, some erroneous, some rash, some and seditious, and others offensive to pious ears. Such a global censor does not identify which propositions are condemned as heretical. One cannot identify which propositions the council intended to define as dogmas of faith. Hence, while the conciliar decrees against Wycliffe and Huss received papal confirmation, they do not contain any dogmatic definition. So even if you want to say, look, these things did receive papal confirmation, okay, but as a disciplinary decree, not as the teaching of conciliarism. The other important decree of Constance was the one obliging the Pope to summon general councils at regular intervals, the decree frequens. This is clearly a legislative decree which soon fell into destitute. But it did result in the summoning of the next great council, begun at Basel, and not all of its sessions were accepted, by the way, Basel, right? Some of its sessions were not accepted. Continued at Ferrara and Florence, and concluded in Rome. And then he goes on to talk about the Council of Florence. But I think that is a fair treatment of Haec Sancta. Again, to summarize the position here, number one, it would be that Haec Sancta is not putting forward anything dogmatic or even doctrinal. It's putting forward a disciplinary decree. Number two, it's even unclear what exactly Martin V approved from the Council of Constance. So it could be disputed that Haec Sancta itself wasn't actually accepted, or at least this part of it wasn't accepted. Some could argue that, but even if that's not a tenable position, one could still say, but what it is proposing is actually not conciliarism. It's not the idea that a council is in the order of hierarchy over a pope. It's saying that in the case of an emergency situation where it's unclear who the pope is, this council has the authority directly from Christ. It's not delegated from a pope. It doesn't have to be confirmed by pope, because that's the question: who is the pope? So it receives its authority from Christ, and those who are claiming to be popes have to listen to it. It's not saying in the case of when it's clear who the pope is that a council is over a pope. That's the heresy of conciliarism. Moreover, it doesn't even note that it is an authority over a pope authoritatively, right? It's simply noting that it is able to discern in this case who the pope is, which is not necessarily saying that it's superior to a pope, but it's able to discern who the pope is. Okay, well, that's my brief summary of Haec Sancta, and I think that this sufficiently addresses the matters, especially for those who are concerned that Haec Sancta teaches a heresy condemned later on by the First Vatican Council. I don't think that has been adequately proven by, especially Orthodox who make that claim, and some Anglicans make that claim as well. So some Protestants and some Orthodox make that claim. I don't think that they have sufficiently demonstrated their position, and they're going to have to engage with what has been noted here by Sullivan in his work Creative Fidelity, among others. I mean, he just briefly treats it here. There are many others who deal with it in more detail. All right, looking through the chat. Beard grew 1/4 of an inch overnight. That's funny. Let's see. It seems that Michael has done this video before, like several times. Right, I have addressed Haec Sancta several times. I have not addressed it from Francis Sullivan's point of view, which I think is incredibly helpful. And he put some distinctions, or he raises some distinctions that I haven't addressed before in previous videos. So I do think that that this is still, distinct from some of the previous ones that I've done on it. Vigano wrote about the third Rome of Moscow. Do Catholics typically recognize Constantinople as the second Rome? Yes and no. I mean, we ended up recognizing their position as second in the taxis of patriarchs. So you could say that implicitly recognizes it, but that would be not as a divine institution, in the way that old Rome is a divine institution. So even in that case, it's irrelevant. But that doesn't get you to the third Rome claim, even if you were to accept Constantinople as the second Rome in some kind of, disciplinary human way. Why is Michael so far from his books? To give that bouquet effect, man. Come on, what's wrong with you? Let's see. Eastern Rite always has better beards, so maybe true. That's funny. Y'all are going over the beard. I don't know if y'all saw the beard meme that I posted on Twitter the other day, but go and check it out. It has my the reference that I made the other day to Action Hank from Dexter's Laboratory. It has that in there, so you might enjoy that. This is funny. Could the Pope ever legitimately make April Fool's encyclicals for fun? I don't think that would be fitting of a Pope to do in any way. No. I mean, could he, right? Is there some kind of power stopping him from that? No. Should he? Most certainly not. Benedictines and Franciscans got some good beards. That's true. They do have some good beards. Here we go, going back to the beard controversy that gave rise to the schism between Catholics and Orthodox. The Catholic priests don't have beards. They're clean shaven like a Frank. And they're icons of Christ who look like a Frank. If y'all haven't seen the Byzantine lists video that I did, go and watch that one. Yeah, you'll enjoy it. Are implicit canonizations infallible? I take the position that they're irreformable. I mean, how is it that you can allow for the veneration of a person in one of your churches? And here we're talking about local churches, right? Or I mean, we're talking about particular churches, I should say, like an Eastern Catholic church or something. How can you allow for that and yet it be the case that that person is in hell? I don't see that. I don't see that. When will I review some of Seraphim Rose's stuff? Yeah, I need to do that. I mean, it's on the list. I don't know when it will be, though. Let's see. I think I got everything here. Jared says, love the new camera setting. Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you. Monks can eat lard anytime, anywhere, according to the Byzantine list. Yeah, some silly stuff in there. What weight should we give to the CDF's document on the message of Fatima? Let me see. Let me look at it. So we're talking about the message of faith. Let's see. So this was issued by Bertone. And I'm trying to see if there's specific or common approval for the text or for the document by the papacy. Okay, I see Ratzinger's name on here as well. Not seeing any kind of, reference to this being approved by the Pope in an audience. Let's see. Not seeing it. I do see at the very beginning, um, as the second millennium gives way to the third Pope, John Paul II has decided to publish the text of the third part of the Secret of Fatima, but it doesn't. He decided to publish the secret, but what about this explanation of it? Is there some kind of papal confirmation? I'd have to go through the document a little bit more thoroughly. It's been a long time since I've looked at this thing. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing any kind of magisterial papal approbation behind it. So it would appear that this would be, a non-magisterial interpretation of the third secret and commentary on the third secret. So I hope that helps. Oh, this is a good question. What's the difference between calling something infallible versus irreformable? Yeah. So infallible pertains to the organ that teaches. So like the magisterium, it does not refer to the teaching. Teachings are not infallible. Organs of the magisterium can be infallible. Teachings are irreformable. So infallible refers to the organ, irreformable refers to the teaching of that organ. Definitive applies to both. That's why I like using the term definitive best. But again, infallible refers to the authority that teaches the teaching, and irreformable refers to the teaching that is taught. So one is a subject, one is an object. That's how the language is used technically among magisterial scholars, but obviously in common parlance, we don't really abide by that distinction. But we probably should, right? We probably should use our terms correctly. Camera lens looks smudged. No, it's actually not smudged. It's the incense in the background. The incense has reached this area over here. What else? Do you think that Pope Francis consecrating Russia implicitly validates the Rattrad idea that original consecration was invalid? No, because you can consecrate something that has already been consecrated. And you could also consecrate something more explicitly that was already consecrated implicitly. But again, it boils down to the fact that Sister Lucia herself says that heaven accepted the consecration of John Paul II in 1984. So for whatever that is worth, we need to consider that. Perhaps she was wrong. Maybe so. And maybe this is the first time it's being done properly, presumably. Some are already saying it's not going to be done properly because the bishops of the world aren't there. And, okay, even in that case, all right, well, let's say everything is done perfectly, right? The Pope consecrates it explicitly, and, all the bishops of the world simultaneously consecrate it. Do you think that the Rattrad criticisms would stop there? No, they would continue, and they would say, well, not enough of the faithful and laity have done enough penance. So that's also why peace hasn't been brought, because not enough people have done their first 5 Saturday devotions or something like that. At the end, it's really a prophecy that could really never be verified ultimately. So I think that we need to spend less time focusing on this prophecy and more focusing on things that we do know, like scripture and tradition. That's not to say that Fatima is not important. No, it's important. And that's not to say that the consecration shouldn't be done. Yes, it should be done. But it's to say, let's keep things in perspective. That's all. All right. The room is smudged, enslaved by truth says. That's funny. That is hilarious. It will never be good enough. Don't worry. Complainers are going to complain. Look, when you build your entire platform on criticizing the Pope, you're going to have to find something to criticize. Even when he does things that you think is good, you're going to have to keep the criticisms going when that is what you built your platform on. It is what it is. That, or you're going to have to say, hey, I'm wrong. Okay. You'll probably lose a lot of followers. And okay, maybe you're willing to do that, and maybe you should do that. But I suspect a lot of people who have built their platform on criticizing Pope Francis aren't willing to do that. The air is smudged. There you go. There you go. All right, y'all. That's it. Wanted to sneak this one in there and address Haec Sancta. And I'll continue to address some of these questions if y'all will send them to me in the comment section. Any video that you would like me to cover, please let me know. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate it. Also check me out, patreon.com/reason in theology, or hit the join button to become a member here on the YouTube channel. Either way, you'll get access to extra perks and you'll be supporting what I'm doing. So, all right. See y'all later. God bless.
Hey RNT fans, if you're looking to buy a home or sell a home and would like a realtor who shares your beliefs, be sure to check out our sponsor, realestateforlife.org, and be sure to tell them Reason and Theology sent